Hey, what's up everybody? It's Christian with Reaper Disc, and today I'm going to talk to you about those little numbers on the front of your disc that are supposed to tell you how it's going to fly. So flight numbers are a little confusing, I'm not going to lie. They are supposed to tell you how your disc is going to fly without ever having to throw it. And there is a full system dedicated to showing you how those numbers affect the flight or kind of what they represent. However, every company is a little different. When flight numbers were first introduced, they were set up to be able to give you a heads up on how you can expect the disc to fly and make it a little easier to shop for new disc and new molds that were coming out all the time without having to buy every single one of them and test them out and figure out you don't like it. The flight numbers were supposed to be able to at least give you an idea on what that disc is supposed to do before you go out and test it for yourself. That way you didn't grab something you think was very understable and it turns out to be very, very overstable, and it's just completely useless at that point, or at least what you originally bought it for. Now, the downside to flight numbers are there is no single governing body that determines flight numbers. It is up to every individual manufacturer to set those numbers based on kind of their own criteria. That is why discs with the same flight numbers across different manufacturers a lot of times fly very differently and not like, something or another. That's because, Innova uses their system, and Discraft uses theirs, and the Trilogy brands use theirs, and Discmania uses theirs, and they're all kind of similar, but they never line up 100%. That's why, again, these flight numbers are a little more like a guideline and kind of a preview of what you can expect, but not an absolute definitive of the flight. That always comes down to you getting the disc out and testing it out yourself. So we'll go through the flight numbers and what all they represent. So the flight numbers are set up as 4 different numbers in very specific order. And it goes the speed rating, the glide rating, the turn, and then the fade. And we'll start with speed. Speed is a very crucial and arguably the most important of these 4 numbers. The speed rating isn't how fast the disc flies. That's totally dependent on you. Granted, yes, faster discs with wider, sharper rims are going to be able to travel faster than blunt things like a putt and approach disc. However, the speed itself still comes from you throwing it. The speed rating, or the speed number, is simply how fast the disc needs to be thrown in order for the rest of the flight numbers to make sense. And I'll go into this more in just a second. That is why the speed rating is the most important, because all of the other numbers are very, very tied into the speed. In order for a disc to have a -1 turn and then a 2 fade, it has to be thrown at the very specific speed as referenced in the speed rating. If you throw it faster than the speed rating, so if you throw a 7-speed disc the same speed as you would throw a 12-speed disc, it's naturally going to be a lot more understable. Whereas if you throw a 12-speed disc like you would a 6-speed, then it's going to be a lot more overstable than the numbers really say that it will be. That's why a lot of people, whenever they're getting really fast things and they don't have the arm for them, they're not flying like you think they would or the numbers would suggest. But disc selection and picking the right disc for you is a completely different video, and you should go check it out as well. So about the speed. Speed starts at a speed 1 and goes all the way to a speed 14. 14 is generally reserved for the widest allowable rim that the PDGA will accept. That means, I think one of the fastest is like the Firestorm from Innova, and it is a speed 14. It's got a very, very wide rim, and that is the widest that the PDGA will allow for an approved golf disc. And it goes all the way down to a 1-speed. And I actually have a 1-speed right here with the Innova Sonic. And you can tell it is a very blunt, straight up and down rim, and it's made to go really, really slow. So those flight numbers are, like I said, they're all integrated back to speed. So there isn't necessarily a true chart that says exactly what mile per hour speed should be thrown to generate a 7 speed or a 9 speed. It's all kind of subjective and dependent on, again, the manufacturer who sets those numbers. However, there is generally a good thought and at least a subconscious kind of scale that most players are able to pick apart and say, it's like, okay, this is about how fast a 9 speed is versus a 4 speed versus a 12 speed. And that kind of gets internalized after a while, and it's a lot of experience and trial and error and practice that really kind of gets that ingrained into muscle memory. So now we'll talk about glide rating. Glide goes from 1 glide all the way up to a 6. And that just means how much the disc wants to stay in the air after you throw it. So disc with very low glide, like a Toro, for example, that has a very low glide rating. It doesn't really want to stay in the air that long, which means, one of the cliches in disc golf is it only goes as far as you throw it. So it means that it doesn't want to stay in the air and keep gliding and pushing forward or further or anything like that after you release it from your hand. As it slows down, it's trying to get to the ground fast. That versus a very glidey disc like a Tern that has a 6 glide rating, or a glitch that has a 7 glide rating. I'm sorry, did I say it goes up to 6? I'm sorry, it goes up to 7. My bad. So you have discs that are very, very glidey, and they want to stay in the air forever. Those are very useful whenever you can't put a lot of power on something, but want it to continue carrying, or you're really trying to stretch out that extra distance. Or if you've got a big tailwind, the glide really wants to keep it in the air. Speaking of a little bit of wind. So that is kind of how the glide affects everything. It also allows it to stay in the air longer, which means that it can slow down as far as the rotation on the disc goes. Whenever you get that rotation slowing down, that's whenever the stability can kick in, but we'll talk about that in a second. All right, so now we'll get into our third number, the Tern rating, or high-speed turn, as some people will like to call it. This goes on a scale of +1 to -5, with +1 being the least amount of high-speed turn and -5 being the absolute most. So the further down and away from 0 you get, that's the more flippy or understable a disc will be while it still maintains speed. Now, you see discs all the time that have a -3, -4 turn rating, and those are the discs that whenever they release out of your hand and they're still going the fastest, those are going to be the ones that are really cooking over and getting over to Anheuser, or even getting all the way over to edge and being a roller. Now, these discs are very good for players who have a very low arm speed and need the extra little bit of turn and understability in order to get more distance before they start fading. And speaking of fade, the fade rating, or low speed stability, is that last number. This goes on a scale from 0 all the way to 5. 0 being having the least amount of low speed stability and fade at the end of the flight, versus a 5 which has the absolute most. These are discs that, the ones with a higher fade rating, the more they slow down, that is the more that they're really wanting to hook and hyzer back at the end and get back left if you throw a right-handed backhand. If you throw righty forehand or lefty backhand, then just flip those directions around. These discs are really good for fighting the wind, as well as really trying to get around corners. High fade discs are excellent for skip shots and big spikes and things like that. Now, all of these numbers can be a little bit confusing the more you think about them. However, whenever you start breaking them down one by one, they start getting a little more simple. Whenever you start tweaking a few of those numbers is whenever you can start getting some very interesting flights. every once in a while you can find a disc that has a fair amount of high-speed turn, but also a good amount of low-speed stability. So that turn rating is down by like -1, -2, but the fade is still at a 2 or even a 3. And as long as you can throw the disc fast enough to get those numbers to be accurate, that's whenever you can start getting really big S shots, flex shots, and those full flights that everyone always talks about. Now, with the turn and the fade, I do want to make a quick note by saying that that is also dependent on speed, but in a slightly different way. As you throw the disc naturally has the most rotational speed that it's going to have in the entire flight as soon as it leaves your hand. That rotational speed is going to decrease the further down the fairway it goes due to wind resistance and natural dissipation of that rotational force. That's going to start slowing those rotations down. Now, the faster the rotations, the more it wants to turn over or be understable. And the slower it goes, the more it wants to fade or be overstable. So that is why whenever you release a disc out of the hand, it'll naturally want to turn if you have the right disc. But as it slows down, it's going to fade. And that's just because whenever a disc is in the air for a while, you know, those rotational forces will start to decrease, and that's whenever that low speed stability starts kicking in and it's going to hyzer. Now, there are a few things that are going to affect flight numbers. Plastic is one. Baseline plastics are notorious for being more understable, having more turn and less fade than premium plastic discs. That's why you can get a G-Star or a Pro or a DX Destroyer, and it's going to fly closer to like a Mamba or a Tern even, than an actual destroyer. It's not going to have the fade back at the end, and it's going to have a lot more turn. Whereas premium plastics are going to not only be just a touch more overstable initially, but also going to hold that stability longer. Baseline plastics and cheaper plastics like that, while they may feel better in the hand and have more grip initially, they're going to beat up and break in faster, which are going to make them more understable much quicker. And if you want to learn more about how things are understable and overstable and what different things can affect that, then pop over to the overstable versus understable video here on the channel. Another thing that affects flight numbers, again, is speed, but we're going to talk about a little different kind of speed. So if you have a disc that you're throwing into a headwind, here's the thing. Why headwind versus tailwinds are going to affect stability and flight numbers. Imagine you throw a disc at 60 miles an hour into a 15 mile an hour headwind. So not only is the disc traveling at 15 or at 60, it also is going an additional 15 due to the wind pushing back against it. Now that disc that you threw at 60 miles an hour is starting to fly like it's flying at 75, like Eagle Wing Man just ripped it. That disc is going to behave much more understable and flippy and flip over a lot easier, which is why you generally want to throw very overstable things in headwinds. Now, the exact inverse is true whenever you get to tailwinds. So if you throw a disc at 60 miles an hour and you're in a 10 mile an hour tailwind, now that disc is only flying like it's being thrown 50 miles an hour, which is why you want to generally throw a little more understable things in a tailwind, because that tailwind is going to stable things out or make it a little more overstable there toward the end of the flight and not allow it to flip over as much during the main portion of the flight path anyway. Another thing that can affect this is weight. And like I referenced in the overstable and understable video, the lighter a disc is, the more understable it's going to be. So I have a Valkyrie in my bag that doesn't fly like a Valkyrie because it's only 150 grams. It's very, very understable because it doesn't have as much weight. Alright, so there's pretty well the flight number system. And as you can see during some of the overlay videos of different discs with different flight numbers and how they flew, you can see what those numbers really mean. I hope this was helpful, and I hope you guys learned something today. If there are any other topics that you want us to look at and try to explain, then reach out, leave us a comment, and let us know, and we'll do our best to put out some new stuff and really get the stuff out that you guys want to see. If you like this video, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. That way you can keep up to date with all of the new content we're putting out. Follow us at social media at Reaper Discs. That way you can keep up with all of our new releases and restocks. Again, I'm Christian with Reaper Disc. I hope this video helped you guys out, and I'll see you guys on the next one.